Same old man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 580 for April 7th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us this week, everybody. This is going to be a really, really fun show. I have been looking forward to this for a few weeks now, and it might seem a little bit random at first glance, you know, because the man has no movie out this weekend, and the films we're going to be talking about really have nothing to do with Monkey Man or anything that's coming up, but
his movies are pretty random in and of themselves, so I guess it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's very fair. However, if you are aware of our guest, many of you are, and if you're not, you very much should be. And if you know him, you know how he feels about one Michael Bay. So we had to bring him on because we certainly have a history with Bay himself and some of his movies, particularly my history with the Transformers franchise. So I reached out and he reached back. It was very exciting. So joining us is the wonderful, the great Brandon Streussnig. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm always down to talk Bay, so this is exciting.
Yes, this is very exciting. So I do love your enthusiasm for Michael Bay and Transformers Dark of the Moon, because that's a movie that I've always championed. I feel like we've talked about it quite a few times here on the show.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes it can be a lonely island. At least historically, it's been that way. So to see you champion that film as well has been nothing but pure bliss for me. So we'll get to that maybe here in a little bit. I guess to open up here, I just want to get your thoughts on Michael Bay, perhaps broadly, your history with Michael Bay. What drew you to coining the term Proud Baytriot, which is a glorious term.
I love that.
Absolutely love that.
It's such a passionate fan base he develops, but they seem like a healthy fan base.
Yeah, so it's weird because I'll try to make this all make sense. I've always liked, like Bad Boys, The Rock, Armageddon, and Bad Boys 2 especially, but there was a weird period there where I kind of fell off for a little bit. And that was around the same time that I was like getting frustrated with Hollywood action in general, and I was kind of just watching a lot of direct-to-video stuff and like falling in love with like Scott Adkins and those kind of people and everything. And then the last few years, like with John Wick and Mission Impossible, I started to like circle back around, and I was like, oh yeah, I really do love Michael Bay. Like I've always loved Michael Bay. Like I love Pain and Gain and everything. And then it was really, it feels recent, but I mean, it is recent, but Ambulance is what really reignited it for me. Like just the trailer for Ambulance alone, I was like, oh man, like I love this. Like I love this guy. And then I saw Ambulance, like I think 4 times in theaters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think I was the only one who saw it the weekend it came out. So
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And like I have a lot of weird thoughts on him. I think he's sometimes accidentally a leftist filmmaker without meaning to be, because he kind of he people love to assign like politics to him and everything, and I don't always care that much about that because it's like whatever, but but I do think his reputation is very funny because I'm seeing someone right now, and we were talking about movies, and she just was asking who I like and everything, and I said at one point Michael Bay. And she texted back in all caps, Michael Bay with a million question marks. Isn't he sexist? And I was like, and I was like, well, I can't argue that. And if you ask Megan Fox, I think she'd say so.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I think to be a fan of his, you have to sort of reckon with everything that comes with him. And it's not always great. And I love him.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I mean, I feel like I have a similar narrative there as well. I love the Bad Boys films when they came out. Bad Boys 2, I do remember watching in theaters. I was a senior in high school, I believe, at the time. and just fell in love with that movie. And it was just a few years later after that where they announced that he was going to be doing Transformers. And many of our listeners might know this, but for context, for those that don't, I grew up an avid fan of Transformers. Watching the cartoon, I was prime when that cartoon was out. Grew up reading a ton of the comics. I was just a huge Transformers fan. So being a Michael Bay fan and then hearing that he's going to do Transformers, which is maybe the franchise that I was tied to the most as a kid, I was amped up on all kinds of energy and excitement. And I have really come to love those movies, flaws and all, you know. And you're right, Brandon, you do have to wrestle with the good and the bad when it comes to Michael Bay.
You have to let go of Michael Bay, the man, and Michael Bay, the director sometimes.
Because as a filmmaker, he obviously knows how to render spectacle and the imagery and all the practical qualities that come with his films. And then there's also the Juliet laws. So it's like, okay, you have to do both. You have to wrestle with both sides of it, I guess.
Oh,
but,
Age of Extinction, you think.
I know. And so,
I love that movie, but yeah, man.
Yeah, exactly. There's always
nice
the
way
good
to try
and
to
the
sweep it
bad.
under the rug, I feel like.
But to your point,
they just could have made her 18 and it all would have been fine.
Exactly.
I know.
There was no reason.
1 year.
It's like someone involved in that movie was like really trying to make a statement there.
I mean, clearly, yeah.
Then, of course, he goes a little bit younger with The Last Night with Isabelle Monet or Isabelle Merced and kind of like sexualizes her a little bit. So it's almost like he keeps reversing course.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just both sides of Michael. You just have to deal with him in that way.
Yeah.
But it's interesting hearing you talk about Ambulance because I feel like for me, it might not be that movie specifically as vivid as it is for you, but generally speaking, it is kind of that evolution of the modern action film or the modern blockbuster today and just how much of a CGI suit many of them tend to be. And you look back at his movies and so much of it holds up in terms of the CGI. I believe there are probably already essays written out there. If not, there's probably going to be a ton as far as how CGI in the 2000s just tends to look so much better than it does these days. But like I think of the Transformers films in that regard as well, or even some of the CGI you get in even the Bad Boys movies, for example. So like, it's incredible how he's able to seamlessly blend CGI because he does so much practically as well. And
that's the thing. Yeah.
You look back at his films in hindsight and you're like, okay, well at the time, were they did you feel about them as passionately as I do now? I mean, yes and no. I do understand why they weren't received the way, let's say, the Mission Impossible movies are received these days. I get it. I totally understand why Bay is polarized, but I do think there's also a level of, in retrospect, given the state of Hollywood now, I think he was perhaps maybe a little ahead of his time as well.
Well, I think that makes his film so interesting. And a few other filmmakers, even outside of Michael Bay, I feel like are falling into that same category where we're sort of like recontextualizing their films a bit because of the state of Hollywood and movie making nowadays. I almost feel like you could throw M. Night Shyamalan into that as well. There's been like even a resurgence with movies like The Village, for instance. And even despite the flaws there, we're focusing on different things aesthetically that just make these movies back in the day feel even more like movies now than the current soup that we're getting now, as you put it there, JD. And I think Michael Bay is another great example of that because his films, say what you will about them narratively or problematically, as we might even get into as well, those movies are tangible. Like they have a tangibility to them. And that's what made Ambulance so refreshing just as an action film is that it kind of felt like a weird 90s film that never got released, that they just released like 30 years later. But that's weirdly kind of exciting. And the state of Hollywood, I think, makes his films more interesting nowadays. And he's one of those filmmakers that falls into that for sure.
I like that you brought up M. Night because he's another one who I love, and he had a sort of similar wilderness period. Bay didn't have a wilderness period. It's just I feel like people might associate, I mean, as successful as they were, I think people might associate the Transformers movies as the wilderness period because he was making IP instead of his own things. And but I think they are very similar, and because I love script. I think great scripts are obviously important and everything, but I'm definitely more of a visual person when it comes to watching film. And you're right, like the guy like M. Night, you know, I love Lady in the Water. I think the script is very silly. I think he makes a lot of silly decisions, but that movie is stunning, and it's like directed so well. And and I just think, and I think like for a long time we got stuck on, you know, lore and, you know, like creating universes and everything, that we just like lost sight of like movies are supposed to look like something.
They're moving pictures, right?
And it's just, it's funny. My friend, I don't know if either of you know him. He's on Twitter a little bit, but one of my good friends is a filmmaker named Liam O'Donnell. He's made he wrote the first Skyline movie, and then he did direct to video sequels to it that are like unbelievable. But anyway, he coined a term. I don't know if he coined this, but he always uses it. He's always yelling at people to stop script watching when you're watching a movie, because some people will be like, this movie is great, but there's like this flaw in the script, and he's like, yeah, but are you enjoying yourself? Like, I don't know. I think I fall a little in the middle of that, because I do think you can't just dismiss script completely.
You can't, but it depends on when's a movie good enough visually, aesthetically, and more interesting in that way that you can find yourself overlooking those script issues. Because sometimes it could be a certain performance, it could be a certain visual flair that maybe has its own emotive aspect to it, that it could almost fill in those script gaps at times. And sometimes that can happen.
I think that's perhaps where I've evolved the most over the last 10 years since doing this show, because I do like to have fun with, again, the Transformers movies, or even Marvel in the last 12 years or however long they've been doing this. You know, whatever the movie is. But generally, I feel like my cinephile roots really stemmed from what a movie was doing on a thematic level or an emotional level. And we, of course, have talked about that a lot over the years. But I do think, especially over the last 5 years or so, the visual form and how I tend to respond to movies has really shifted in that regard. And I do think that I'm able to meet a film on its own terms. And I think intent is certainly a part of it. I don't think anyone is going into Transformers expecting it to win an Oscar for best screenplay. Like, we know that's not going to happen. So
I mean, we even know the history. A movie like Revenge of the Fallen maybe didn't even have a script in the first place.
Didn't even have one.
That came out.
Exactly.
That's why it's the worst one.
Exactly. But even that movie still has the patented Bay cinematic, you know, spectacle that you can enjoy at times, such as the forest battle, which I've talked about, you know, quite a bit. Like, there's still layers to that visually. And of course, Steve Jablonsky's score, which I'm sure we'll talk about as this conversation goes as well.
He just cooks. He cooks.
I tell you what, I don't know if anyone listening to this has had a chance. Last year, I wrote a pretty lengthy article on the website at InSessionFilm.com about Jablonsky's Transformer scores. It was one of the most joyous things ever done. If anyone wants to go check that out.
Isn't it fun to write about stuff you actually like?
I know. Man, that man is a genius. At any rate, my point in all of that is to say that I agree. I do think that the visuals of a movie absolutely do matter. And obviously that is such a defining trait of Michael Bay. And I do find myself these days still responding to what's there on the page, its thematic ideas, how that gels in execution. But perhaps more so than ever, I do feel like what is there visually is starting to impact me, especially when a film relies on visual storytelling, which is, you know, a part of Michael Bay's ethos for sure. I do find myself responding more now. I'm with you. And I think even just looking at the visual language of his action films nowadays, and maybe this is another aspect that has aged well with him. It's not even just the melding of
practical and computer effects that we were talking about, but a lot of times it's the editing. Like going even back, and we'll obviously talk a lot about Dark of the Moon that kind of stimulated this whole episode in the first place. But rewatching some of those sequences in the final act, all in Chicago, for how like crazily edited that movie is, like I can connect the dots of where things are going very seamlessly. And that's not an easy thing to do for how jarring that film kind of feels, how big, and how sometimes it kind of lacks color because you're actually watching literal Transformers fight each other that have similar color palettes at times. But there's a distinction between character as well. Like it's not even just that it's in camera; it's the smoothing of it all too, and he's good at that.
And something you touched on a little bit earlier when you were talking about Ambulance that I really appreciated was like, I think a thing that with that movie in particular that reminded me why he is such an important filmmaker is he is innovative. And I think with Ambulance in particular, like we've seen like the last 10, 15 years of like drone cameras being used in films, but it's always like very boring, very static, like we're going over a lake or something. But he took the drones and like, I've never seen that done before, what he was doing with it, like going under cars with them and like weaving in and out of traffic. And it's just like, that movie is like it just reminded me of like, oh yeah, this guy knows what he's doing and he's willing to kind of go crazy a little bit. And I think that
I love that. Yeah. And the experiment doesn't always work in that film for me. And in a way, it sometimes reminds me of, the experimentation of like Doug Liman's Roadhouse that we just talked about. But that film fails so much more often than Ambulance does.
Oh, for sure.
At least there was a conviction and a vision that Michael Bay had. There was more consistency there for sure.
I think the one thing that frustrated me with Ambulance, even though it was my favorite movie of that year, which is crazy because 2022 was a pretty good year for movies.
It was.
But that it did frustrate me a little bit that I feel like as good as I think his editing is generally pretty solid, but in that movie, I will say I wish maybe sometimes it held a little longer on one of those drone shots because I felt like he was having so much fun with it that he had all these angles he wanted to use, and he's like, let's cut them all together. And
interjections happening.
Yeah.
That's the thing though with Michael Bay is his films are often quickly edited, especially when it gets to the action. So the fact that those drone shots last as long as they do is also a little surprising to me.
That's fair, yeah.
But I do understand that perspective, and I agree. I think what's interesting about the use of drones is that it feels like a piece of technology that was made for Michael Bay because the camera in his movies never stop moving ever. And it doesn't matter what the situation or the context is, even if it's just two characters talking, the camera always moving. And I do love that about Michael Bay is that he doesn't really distinguish between a simple quiet moment where two characters are just having an exchange or whether it's a massive battle in Chicago and Transformers are beating the snot out of each other. It doesn't matter. The camera is always moving and it creates scale, of course. It creates parallax and depth and layers. And there's, of course, the contrasting colors, the background lighting that you see in a lot of his movies. Like, I love that about Michael Bay, for better or worse. It's what makes him distinctive. So you add in something like drone technology where it has to move. Well, I guess it doesn't have to, but oftentimes you see that
he has to move.
He's of course
he
going
can't
to
stand
move
still.
And he finds the most innovative and unique ways to move a drone in between cars coming. And I did rewatch that earlier this week in preparation for this conversation. And I do think I enjoyed it even more this time around, especially
because you and I were kind of mixed on it when we first saw it, but I think we were maybe gravitating more towards the film tonally, and we probably should have been latching on to more of the film's like aesthetic and its visual language more than anything else.
That's it.
I want to rewatch that one as well.
I will say his, as much as I love him, his sense of humor can be a little much sometimes.
It can be,
Totally
and sometimes I feel like it's there because, like, I think he sometimes secretly knows it's not going to work for everyone, so he just like it's almost as if he is really trying to annoy people. Like,
he's very much, he's very much, I believe, 100% the I make movies for me mindset over everyone else, and Yeah.
And if he has something that's probably going to upset some people or annoy some people, he's probably thinking, I'm going to focus on that just a little bit harder. It's like, oh, you didn't like that Bud Light ad in Age of Extinction? We're going to throw another one in last night. How about that?
Just love how brazen that is. Just does not care that it just turned into a Bud Light commercial after the movie.
I mean, he even, I don't even think the ambulance isn't even the first time he does it, but he references his own movies in Ambulance.
Oh, yeah.
Like, someone's calling out.
I totally forgot
Revenge of
about
the Fallen.
that.
He's got Shia LaBeouf like hanging up Bad Boys 2 posters, and
That's
there's a clear
exactly.
shot where it says a film by Michael Bay.
Yeah, that was one of the fun things about rewatching Ambulance as well. I totally had forgotten about that. I was like, oh, he just referenced The Rock. Oh, they just referenced Bad Boys. Like,
I love it.
yeah. I mean,
Interesting cinematic universe idea.
Yeah.
I do kind of wonder if, and I don't know where his involvement is when it comes to the comedy of his movies, because there's something like Transformers where it's a lot more hit or miss for me. But then you go something like the Bad Boys films where very little of it does not work. Like I love it. And maybe it's just the chemistry between Will Smith and Martin Lawrence that is so
I think that's
incredible and
Yeah.
palpable.
I think it's a performative thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it really comes down to performance.
I don't know many actors that could make it work. And I don't know if it does for you. Admittedly, I do laugh at it though. When Martin Lawrence is like, this mama rat is humping the shit out of this mama rat.
Well, yeah, like I think Bad Boys 2.
And you're gonna cut to like the puppets kind of going at it.
I think Bad Boys 2 is maybe his masterpiece just because it's like all there, I think, in terms of him as a filmmaker. But it's weird because I love it, but it's a deeply ugly movie, like thematically.
Gosh, yeah.
But they do, like, those two make it work so well that you're just like, you're having a blast with it, even though you're sitting there and you're like, man, like that movie might make the most case that he hates people. Like he just but I love that movie, and a lot of it does have to do with how good those two are together. Like they're very funny together.
If they're on Bay's wavelength, if he's working with an actor that is on his wavelength, a lot of it is going to work humorously. I feel like I think it's going to be all about that delivery, and I'm with you, Brandon, on Bad Boys 2. If it's not Michael Bay's best movie, it's certainly his most Michael Bay movie. And in a weird way, that kind of makes it his best movie then, I guess. I could certainly argue that movies like The Rock and Pain and Gain are certainly more seamless experiences as movies, and might make them quote unquote better movies in that regard. But Bad Boys 2 is probably my favorite. It's just because of all that is thrown in there.
Yeah, it's for sure mine. And you're right about having an actor on his wavelength. Like, I keep bringing up Ambulance, but Gyllenhaal is like in the zone in that movie. And I think he's just like so on his wavelength. And it's funny, a lot of people consider, if it's not Revenge of the Fallen, they considered Six Underground his worst movie. But I only saw that for the first time a few years ago, away from like when it came out and everything. And it has its problems, but he somehow managed to. I think what I was most nervous about is that his sense of humor with Ryan Reynolds was going to be a nightmare, and he somehow managed to like subdue Ryan Reynolds enough to where it's like not annoying. And I think it's just because, like you said, like you said, his camera never stops moving, and he does it in a way that where it like it gives. He has what the very. His like iconic spinning shot, around like the heroes. And when he does that to Ryan Reynolds, it gives him a sense of gravitas where I'm like, oh, this is like he feels like a real guy for once. But that was the one thing where I was like, oh man, are their wavelengths going to be too much for me to handle? And it was like that's the only time I've ever liked Ryan Reynolds. But,
That's fair.
I have to rewatch that movie. That's the one that I probably like the least.
That's advanced patriotism for sure. Like you really gotta lock in for that one because it's a lot. Like I have friends who are diehard Bay heads like me who are like we can't ride with you on that one, and I'm like I get it.
It's lesser for me as well for that reason.
Exactly. But I've only seen it the one time, and again, given the state of Hollywood now, as we noted earlier, and how I feel like my patriotism has only enhanced over the last 4 or 5 years. I might come around on that a little bit more. I don't know, but
it's definitely one that I will say is like, if I had to put it somewhere, it would be lower on his filmography. It's like, I don't think it's like Pearl Harbor bad. That's the only one of his that I don't go back to often, but yeah,
I go back to that one more often, more than most, for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
One, I think the Hans Zimmer score is really great.
Oh yeah.
Also, and again, for context for you, Brandon, or for those listening that don't know as well. So I grew up not only a Transformers fan, but my goal was to go into the Air Force. That's what I wanted to do, because my uncle flew in the Air Force. Yeah. And I was really close to him as a child. And so I grew up learning all about the history of the United States Air Force. When I was a freshman in high school, I would almost put money that no one knew more about the air war of World War II than me.
Wow.
I was probably the most knowledgeable 15-year-old on that specific subject. So watching Pearl Harbor through that lens, and also let me be clear on this as well, the historical accuracy of that film is not very good. Don't misinterpret this. Okay, it's not good. However, there are elements of it that are, and the one element that he does get mostly right, aside from the hula shirts that they're flying in, that's all garbage. Yeah. But aside from that, the aerial choreography is actually quite great. It's very, very good. And I love those scenes in a vacuum. I think they're really great. Like there's on YouTube, I think there's a cut where you can just watch those by themselves. And
what's it, like a 30-minute short film or something like that?
Yeah,
and that's a great short film.
And it really is, like, because that element of the film I do think is really great, and it speaks to that part of me that I like about history, I guess. But so like I go back to that film for that specific reason. I do agree that on the whole that is a very messy, not great movie though.
It kind of reminds me of like if you remember back in the VHS days, when the movie, like let's say Titanic, were out in VHS, it was 2 tapes, right?
Yeah,
clearly broken into 2 halves, and that one had a reputation that the first tape is the romance, the second tape is the ship sinking. That's the action film. Pearl Harbor, I felt like, was kind of similar. Like you had the romance and then the action film at the back end, but the only difference is that all of Titanic actually works. Whereas like Pearl Harbor, it's like, okay, I'm just gonna watch the second tape and I'm fine. But I'm with you, JD. I think from an aerial standpoint, there is a spectacle to that movie that is still rather exciting. It's just the movie that surrounds it is not. And that's the big thing there.
And I also think about that film, going back to something we said earlier, where if you just turn off the screenplay and you just watch it visually, especially the actual attack itself, or even leading up to the attack, visually, Michael Bay does inject his ethos into that film, and you compare it to others that have tried to mimic Michael Bay's style, such as Battleship, for example, which fails miserably at the Michael Bay aesthetic. But you watch that film, again, maybe just mute it and just look at it visually, and there's a lot of texture to that movie from that perspective. Like there's scale to it. There's these low angle shots of the soldier, or the sailors rather, on the ships, and you get these long, huge guns that really give you a sense of how massive these ships would be. Or the moment of the lieutenant looking into the sky, and he's looking off into the distance, but we see in camera there's a bunch of planes ahead of him to, again, give us some sort of scope as to how big this attack is going to be. Like that kind of stuff I do love about that film as well. It's lesser Michael Bay on the whole, for sure, but the things that make him who he is visually, I think, is still there, and I can at least appreciate the film from that point of view.
Yeah, and I like the lens that you were looking at it through. That's I've never heard anyone talk about it that way, and I really love that. And it made me think a little bit while you were talking. It almost could be a movie out of time. Like you could play it without, just you put an orchestral score over it, and it's just a silent film, and it might work a little better. Like a little bit like a little bit like Howard Hawks' Hell's Angels, which isn't a very good movie, but like I think it was meant to be a silent film. It came out right on the cusp of like when we transitioned, and like the explosions and the aerial combat in that movie are unbelievable for 1930, but it's like kind of not a good movie. But but I mean, but they feel, I don't know, they feel of a piece. And now you kind of made me want to rewatch Pearl Harbor, 'cause it's not the one I go back to often.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I do like it. And I mean, maybe you just have to fast forward through some of the drama. And so,
did I say
it's a good chunk of the movie?
Did I say Howard Hawks or I can't remember. It was Howard Hughes who did Hell's Angels. I don't know if I said that. I might have said Hawks by mistake.
I think you said Hawks. But I know who you mean.
Yeah, but it was Hughes. Yeah, just wanted to correct that. I didn't want you guys to get anyone yelling at you.
Our listeners are very adamant about those things too. They'd be very nice about correcting someone. They're not cynical though.
Yeah, exactly. I mess stuff like that up all the time anyway. So. But something you said earlier, Brendan, I wanted to circle back to when it comes to something like Bad Boys 2, because that is also my favorite of his. And rewatching that this week, I texted this to Brendan, but I watched that film and I've seen it dozens of times, especially when it first came out in theaters, and then when it came out on DVD. I have seen the film God knows how many times, but I watched it again this week and I laughed so hard. I was so engaged with it. It was like watching it for the first time all over again. Like that's how much I really love that movie. And it really is the most Michael Bay, because when you think of his iconic imagery, such as that low angle spinning camera shot with the actors rising vertically, like I feel like you think of Bad Boys 2, perhaps like even more specifically Bad Boys 2 more than any other film, although that's something he does in a lot of his movies, obviously. So you think about that, you think about Michael Bay in terms of explosions and cars flying everywhere. You certainly get that in Bad Boys 2. We talked about the humor and the chemistry of Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. And it really does feel the most Michael Bay. And even though it does have this cynical backbone, to Brandon's point earlier, I still think he's able to make that intense and engaging, also really fun. And it's crazy how oftentimes those things coexist simultaneously, which is why I think that highway chase sequence is maybe my favorite of any Michael Bay movie, because there are stakes at play, right? Where Martin Lawrence, his character is freaking out because his sister is being chased on this highway. And so there is urgency to the sequence and how it plays out. However, because of how it unfolds and the chemistry between those two characters, it is also hilarious, right? You get that moment of him shooting the dashboard and him freaking out about it, you know, or them, throwing cars from this giant truck. And Martin Lawrence is like, you see that? They're throwing cars. How do I not see that? like that kind of it's crazy how they make that so funny and entertaining in a moment where the dramatic urgency, the stakes of it could not be more higher, at least for them in that moment. And it's incredible. And then you get all the explosions, you get all of the mayhem, if you will.
It's also gross. So like there's a moment earlier where they're instead of throwing cars, they're throwing dead bodies at them.
Yeah, that's at the end of the film, but that's another great moment.
Who
too.
thinks of that? That is so disgusting.
And then Michael Bay.
And then again, like I don't know how like political you guys get, but there's that whole ending where we're like invading another country and it's really kind of gross and everything. And it's like, but at the same time, it's like it's thrilling. Like you can't help but to be like, I don't know. He's so fascinating to me because, again, like I say he's accidentally left-leaning because I think his movies will make points where I'm like, man, like I really agree with that. But sometimes I feel like maybe I'm being too galaxy-brained. Like I look at ambulance as like driving a tool of the medical industry through like how bad the medical industry is.
Fair.
But I don't think he's looking at it that way. He's, but
Yeah, it just sees as a conduit to make an action movie.
Right. But I think 13 Hours is a really interesting example because I stayed away from it for a while, because when you hear he's making a Benghazi movie, you're like, oh man, I don't know. Like,
yeah, that's fair.
But I don't love that you don't get the perspective of anybody but the American soldiers. But at the same time, that movie is so much more somber than I was expecting it to be. It felt a lot like it never felt gross to me. It always felt like, oh, we shouldn't be here, and here's why. So
it's very similar to like Black Hawk Down in that way, which and we talked about this before, JD, when we did that retrospective for 2001. We don't really see Black Hawk Down as jingoistic as some people claim it to be. Like it is in many ways kind of a critique on the American government's involvement in something like that. And I feel like 13 Hours is in a way a weird companion, even if it's maybe like a bit of a softer exploration of that very thing. And I think that's an interesting thing.
That movie really solidified for me that, like, we throw around terms like propaganda and propaganda and all that stuff, but it really solidified for me that he's not so much jingoistic as he's distrustful of institutions and loves individuals, and I found that very illuminating, and that movie I think is a lot better than its reputation.
I like that
I
movie,
agree.
13 Hours specifically.
We really liked it at the time, and it was also refreshing just to see him outside of Transformers, because that was the first time since Bad Boys 2, I believe.
I think it was,
and that film came out in what, 20?
Because The Island was right before Transformers, right? Yeah, it was.
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah, that might have been in between. Yeah.
So you're right. I think 13. Yeah,
and that was 2016 when 13 Hours came out. So it was nice to see him away from Transformers. And as much as I've enjoyed the franchise, I think we, or most of us, can agree that by the 5th film, he was probably checked out, ready to move on. And 13 Hours, I think, really solidified that hypothesis, because it is really good. And I do love how, in some ways, it contradicts the Michael Bay film, because while it does have its action spectacle, he's not afraid to slow that movie down at times,
right?
And really emphasize character and heart, which we don't really associate with him all that often. And that's a film that I think does that really, really well. I love in that film.
You get really fantastic character moments in that, and I think like and through the way he just shoots actors, plus how in slowing that down, he made John Krasinski feel more like a movie star to me than he ever has before.
I agree.
And same thing with Pablo Schreiber. Between that movie and Den of Thieves, I was like, man, Pablo Schreiber is great, but I mean, he had, I think he's stuck on Halo or something. I don't know, but I'm not a big gamer, so I don't know, but I think he's doing the Halo show. But
neither am I. But you make a great point about John Krasinski, because when I think about John Krasinski, the movie star, just the action centric kind of individual, like let's say with something like Jack Ryan, for instance, there's a lot that he's probably channeling that really started from 13 Hours, and I don't know if we cite that as often as we should. I feel like the physique of John Krasinski and that like physical transformation he started to go through really kind of started with that film. And I don't think we talk about that enough.
No.
Yeah, because that came before that show, right?
It did.
Yeah, I think that was, I want to say that was his first big, I mean, I could be wrong, but that feels like his first big leading role post Office, I think. Because like he
had some supporting roles that were comedy centric. And I know he was sort of, I don't want to say typecast, because he did have a variety that made him really interesting, but he tended to work more in the comedic realm. So this was a nice change of pace at that time.
Yeah, and he had done some animated films looking at his filmography here, but really nothing stands out until he gets to 13 Hours. That's really when his career goes in a very different trajectory.
I almost wonder if we get A Quiet Place without 13 Hours. I don't know.
I don't know. That's a great question.
That's a great question.
Honestly. Because that just came out 2 years later. So
and it's a little more action heavy. Maybe he learned a little bit from Michael Bay. I don't know.
It's very possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
13 hours rules even more than I anticipated now. That movie set a trend and we don't talk about it enough.
we just made the argument that everything,
It's a masterpiece.
everything falls back into 13 hours.
Exactly. Who would have thought it was the root that sprouted all these things?
Oh my gosh. Amazing. Amazing.
Can we quickly talk about Pain and Gain?
Yes.
Because that's a film that I loved at the time that I've really come to love even more now. And if we talked about how Bad Boys 2 might be his masterpiece, it's certainly the most Michael Bay, as Brendan alluded to. If it's not that, I do think it is Pain and Gain for me. I think that is an incredible movie. I don't know, knowing Michael Bay, it's such a weird outlier of a film for him. I don't know if he anticipated on making this striking satire, but that's what it ended up being, and it is incredible. Like I do think it might be his best movie if it's not Bad Boys 2. Like those are my 1A and 1B.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That movie, it is an unbelievable satire of like the American dream and everything, and it's just, again, I never know what's intentional with him or what isn't, but that's another one that solidified for me that he, what I think he sort of believes his very dark view of this country and everything. It's so funny. And it's the other thing that I think that works for that movie. It's weird because like I've always loved that movie too. I loved it when it came out and everything, but I went back and reread reviews from when it came out, and then I really disagreed with a lot of the people saying that like he doesn't have empathy for these characters, because I think in a weird way he does. The movie's making fun of them the whole way through, but I think that he does have a weird sort of empathy for these people who are just trying to find their own way into surviving. And I don't know, that movie's pretty fascinating. And
there's a lot of irony in that movie that I don't know if it was intentional, to your point there, Brandon, but if it was, then it makes it perhaps Michael Bay's best overall film, given the thematic statement of it all. Because there is this kind of like weird deconstructionist mentality to it. Michael Bay certainly known for being a bit of a visualizer of the machismo at times, right? And Pain and Gain certainly has that, but it kind of treats it like a facade. In a way, it's almost saying that this is kind of an ugly thing, and maybe at the time, because it is so visual and so omnipresent, that it's easy to criticize that movie for being just another example of his machismo, even if in actuality I think that film is kind of getting to the ugliness of it. And I don't know if that was intentional because of the way that he films and just the brazen attitude he has behind the camera, but that movie I think comes off as not even just satirical, but deconstructionist, almost like it's deconstructing his own ethos and his own filmography, which I found so fascinating.
Exactly. And I just want to say too, like, I mean, this is a little bit of an aside, but like, man, the performance he gets out of The Rock in that movie is unbelievable.
That's
I think it's his best performance. I think it's his best performance. Not even close.
Like, I probably would have given him supporting that year. Like,
it's a very good performance.
I know, it's interesting. We've been talking a little bit of Michael Bay politics. The Rock has found himself in some, let's say, strange waters, given recent comments for him. And it's made people, like, I've seen people react, being reactionary with it and looking at his filmography and comparing it to others such as Dave Bautista. And look, I don't want to necessarily just hop on that train because of recent comments, but like The Rock to me has always been one thing. Right, like he's good at the one thing that he does when you see him in like Fast and Furious and all that stuff. Pain and Gain is maybe the only movie that he's done where he gives a true performance.
He actually acts in that one.
Really great, and I'm with you, Brandon. Like in retrospect, I might also have him on like a best supporting list there. Like,
you got to redo the InSession Film Awards now.
He's so good. Like, I watched it again 2 years ago because some friends of mine came over who had never seen it, and I was already high on the film, and you forget how good he is in that film.
Yeah.
It is an incredible performance.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the only other one I can think of, just thinking on his filmography, I don't know if either of you have seen Southland Tales, but he's he's very good in that, but maybe not a much different. He's very twitchy in that, but I think this one he kind of honed it in a little better, and he's fantastic in Pain and Gain.
Yeah,
I
so
love that
good.
movie.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can almost say the same thing about Mark Wahlberg. Not a performer that I tend to love all that much, but Michael Bay is able to get the best out of Mark Wahlberg and the physique that he brings to that movie. Anthony Mackie's also good there. So,
and
Pain and Gain has a good cast. It overall has a good cast. It really does. Ed Harris in that movie as well. Yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to get that kind of Wahlberg again either, because he's going down whatever road he's going down, and I think
exactly
probably a year away from him starring in like God's Not Dead 5 or something. So I mean, I think this is that was it for Wahlberg. But
I don't think you're wrong. And that's what's so interesting about that film. It's the striking satire, and he also gets these really great performances, and we just don't think of Michael Bay in that way, like that kind of filmmaker. But
that's what makes me think Pain and Gain was perhaps pretty intentional with that satire and that deconstructionist idea that I was talking about, because we talked about earlier, usually a Michael Bay movie works humorously, emotionally when the actors are on his wavelength, which makes me think that people like Dwayne Johnson and Mark Wahlberg and Anthony Mackie really had to sit down with Michael Bay about what we wanted to convey here. And there was a unified vision. Like it really feels like there was a unified vision with that movie and a unified conviction and intent, which doesn't always happen with a Michael Bay movie, because it feels like Michael Bay overstepping every line that he can to make his own movie for himself. But there was a real sense of camaraderie with Pain and Gain. It's something you can sense.
And I think what's so fascinating about that conviction too, and this circles back to something you were saying, Brandon, earlier, in terms of how people might mistakenly lean Michael Bay one way or another politically, because he does, in a sense, maybe not help himself in that regard, because how many, like in every film, it's guaranteed you're going to get at least 3 or 4 shots of the American flag. And there's all of his work with the military, of course. So you might think of him, like if you just watch his films on the surface, you might think of him in that way. But when you break down his movies, he might lean a little bit more left than you think. And then you get Pain and Gain, which is obviously this satire on the American dream. And it is interesting to see him really lean into that deconstructionist mentality and the conviction of it, and how that comes through in such a great way, or how that comes through even in 13 Hours, as we talked about earlier. Like I can totally understand why people might, again, mistaken for one thing when he's really doing another. All right, let's talk about coffee.
Oh, it's so
you
needed.
Need it.
So
you
good.
Love it.
So delicious.
It's so great. It's the lifeblood that we all need in our lives. And if you're going to drink coffee, you might as well drink great coffee. You don't want bad coffee.
No,
you don't need bad coffee in your life. And that's what a lot of coffee companies, cafes will do. They have cheap coffee because they don't want to, have expensive coffee where they then have to upcharge you. And next thing you know, you're paying for a $15 coffee.
Well, then you're paying for the additive ingredients that they add to it to mask all of those imperfections, which basically turns into caffeinated milk by that point, right?
Exactly. You don't need a ton of milk and sugar in great coffee. A little milk here and there, maybe not a bad thing, but you don't need a ton
not
of
necessarily for flavor, maybe for texture than anything else. Because like from a taste standpoint, if I want to drink my coffee black,
exactly, because
that's what it should be.
A lot of the time, what milk does is it eliminates the bitter qualities in a coffee. That's why people put milk in it, because your coffee is too bitter. or maybe too acidic. And those are signs of average to bad coffee.
Bad coffee. Yeah. Yeah.
Not good coffee.
Yeah.
So that's why we love Coffee Cult, because they source specialty grade coffee. Well, what does that mean? Well, you're talking about coffee that has incredible qualities in it, that has fantastic notes, that gives the coffee texture, that gives it these notes of fruit, citrus, brown sugar, or chocolate, whatever flavor you want in a coffee, you have that. You can do something like the Sumatra coffee, which I know Brendan is a big fan of.
I love that. I also love the bourbon blend that you told me about too. We have with Four Roses. It's really cool. But these are two coffees. I can only drink it black. I love it this way, and that's the way it's intended. Yeah.
And what's great about the Sumatra coffee is that it has these really palpable notes of like chocolate and brown sugar. It's really fantastic. One of my favorite coffees is the Ethiopian Harar. And that it's like, I talked about it like it's like drinking a blueberry muffin. Like you can really taste the blueberries in a strong way, or strawberry.
Sure.
Like those fruity notes are just incredible. It's so good. And to add in even milk, it really eliminates those natural flavors. And those are natural organic flavors to the coffee. That's
what you don't want to dilute from this coffee.
You don't want to dilute that. So that's what we're talking about. This is a high-end gourmet specialty coffee. That's fantastic. And Coffee Cult is one of the best at sourcing that and roasting it. They have very specific roasting profiles to really extract the best qualities and flavors of those coffees. You have to try it. it. So go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. And use our code at checkout, ISF. Again, that code is ISF. Use that at checkout, and you'll get 15% off your order. You got to go check it out. That's coffeecult.com, and we thank them for their support. All right, let's talk about merchandise. Let's talk about T-shirts.
Let's talk about toys.
So one of the best ways to support us is checking out our store, which you can do at InSessionFilm.com/store. Or you can go straight through TeePublic, which is who we use, and that's tpublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. And we have a lot of great stuff up there. There's, of course, shirts with our logos on it. We have Women in Session up there as well. Soon I need to get Chasing the Gold up there. Now that we have two new hosts taking over that show as well.
Yeah, we gotta plug them more often. We gotta merchandise them. We gotta bankroll them.
Exactly. And look, not only do we have our normal logos, but we have Star Wars inspired logos up there as well. Recently, we have Dune inspired as
Barbie
well.
is up there as well.
Barbie is up there as well.
Playing into many commercial strengths. We love it.
Exactly. Or if you're familiar with the show, there's a couple of unique shirts that we have available, such as our
admittedly my favorite
special one.
Yeah.
I'll always worry about you. That's the deal. That's a great one. The best thing that ever happened at La La Land is that it lost Best Picture to Moonlight. You can see that one there.
Yeah.
And recently we have one based off the Oscars, Stop Turning Art into Sports. And there's a couple of varieties for that one there as well.
With a great reference to Network in there as well.
Exactly. So all of that is available. Plus, I'm still waiting to hear for people on this new design that I'm working on. I'm actually wearing it right now for those watching on YouTube.
Yeah. Give it a stand up. Let's see.
So there it is.
The great Amy Adams.
The
movie she should have won an Oscar for.
Should have won. So for those listening, again, it's got the black circle from Arrival, the alien language black circle that you see in that movie, with Amy Adams in the middle, and then it has the quote from the movie, "Despite knowing the journey and where it leads, I embrace it." So
nice job reading that upside down. Spur of the moment. Yeah, good work there.
Thank you. I didn't really get the whole thing, but you get the gist of it.
You get the gist of it. If you've seen Arrival, you know the moment that we're talking about.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So anyway, I haven't put it up there yet because I want to know what people think and if I need to make some adjustments to it. So but I might put it up there because I do like it.
Mhm.
I just wonder if we need to tweak it a little bit. And
Yeah.
honestly, that could go for any of the shirts we have. We can always tweak it and
Oh, yeah,
re-upload
let us
them.
know feedback.
So,
Yeah, seriously, we'd love
any
to hear
feedback
that.
would be great. So,
I mean, these are for you
uh,
guys out there, so we
yeah.
want to know that you're buying something that you want.
Yeah, I mean, and this goes for even if you think they're dumb. Like if you think the designs are bad and you want us to redo them, that's also fine. Like I just want to I want to have T-shirts up there that people are interested in. Like you don't have to worry about offending my feelings. Like it's okay. Like you can offend my feelings. It's like just tell me if you like them or not. That's
It's
kind
only
of,
when I say I don't like him that Judy gets offended.
exactly. That's the only time.
Yeah.
So because like there's the ideas and then there's the execution. Like I love the idea for this Arrival one. Could it be better in execution? Maybe. And that's kind of why I want to hear from people.
Yeah, for sure.
At any rate, that's a long way to say please go to our store. It really helps out
Yes.
the show. We have a ton of T-shirts, and you can also get these designs and things other than T-shirts. There's like phone cases, there's wall art, there's all kinds of stuff up on TeePublic. There's of course mugs that you can get. So
Yep, absolutely.
all of that is available. Again, InSessionFilm.com/store or straight at TeePublic, tpublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. And we thank you for your support.
Yeah.
And I think, I know we're going to talk about Transformers, but I think there's something really interesting. This is going to sound insane about a Transformers movie, but especially the fourth one, which is a kind of a psychotic movie, but because there's so much gross in that movie. And I have a friend who I don't agree with this. He makes the case that the whole Romeo and Juliet law thing is Michael Bay reflecting the ugliest of America back at us. And I'm like, I think you're reading a little too much into that.
Yeah, I wouldn't give him that much credit.
But I do think there's something in for that I really appreciate in that. Again, this is going to sound insane, but I kind of love just speaking on his politics a little bit and the weird thorniness of them all is that there's almost a bit of four that feels like commenting on assimilating into a culture, fighting for that culture, and then that culture discarding you when they don't need you anymore because it's after the Battle of Three and everything.
Yeah.
And the Autobots, again, it's so crazy to say Autobots in the same sentence as like assimilation and everything. And like the Autobots have to go into hiding because they helped the world win the war, and now we don't need you anymore. I think there's something there that I feel like is a running thread through the rest of his movies where it's like
that's fair.
Distrust the institution, love the individuals and everything. Well, and
And what you're talking about there, and this is going to be a weird comparison to make to another filmmaker because aesthetically, stylistically, these two people are nothing alike. But at times, I almost equate Michael Bay to someone like a Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood is someone that is verbalized as being a libertarian, which is all about the individual in many ways. And I'm not saying that Michael Bay identifies the same way. I don't know if he does. I don't care if he does. But the idea of the individual being kind of the forefront against the institution, like you're talking about, does remind me a bit of what Clint Eastwood has said about himself and his political beliefs before. I don't know if they agree, but I've always found that kind of fascinating because that's an interesting perspective to at least not necessarily agree with, but at least listen to. And I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah. I absolutely love that thought there, Brandon. And without saying those words, I think that's exactly what I felt last year when I revisited that film, because there is a tangible dramatic urgency to that film, especially in its first half, that really comes off when Optimus Prime gets into the mix, especially like he's pissed off, for the lack of a better term, throughout a lot of that film. Optimus Prime is, and it is quite visceral, comes through very well in the mannerisms of the character, the vocal work, of course. And then there's, of course, Steve Jablonski's score, which we can also talk about.
going pretty hard in that
so
one.
hard in that film. Goes so hard in that film. But I think all of those elements play into what you're talking about, where through three separate events, they had been working with humanity in a specific way to, coexist with Earth, only for humanity to turn their back on them. And I love how that manifests in that film through the first half of it, especially. I think is really fantastic work, actually.
And just as a small aside, nothing to do with the politics, I just love it goes around often on Twitter, but TJ Miller's death in that movie is an all-timer, and I love that, like one, just garbage person, so it's hilarious on that front, but two, like
it's worked well for times,
but I don't, the backstory behind that is so funny that like Michael Bay didn't think he was being funny enough, so he killed him off earlier. He like they put that scene in earlier because he was like, he told him to be funny, and he kept saying like, you're not funny, so you're supposed to be the comedic relief.
Yes, I'm just disposing of you now. That makes it even better. Disposes in the most ridiculous way possible. But with
it works on two fronts, in the sense that you're getting rid of this garbage person anyway. We don't need him. And also by doing that, it gives room for that dramatic urgency to maybe come to the forefront more. So it worked great in two different ways.
It's such a weird death too, just on its own terms, because on one hand it is so ridiculous you can't help but laugh at it, but it's kind of treated with a sense of melancholy. Like the way Steve Jablonsky's score kind of swells up behind it, it's like, this is really sad.
And he does the swinging close-up shot on the corpse, which is crazy.
And it's so brutal too, because we always associate Michael Bay with explosions, but that might be one of the single shot with the most explosions I've ever seen in one of his movies, and it's just so located on this one guy.
So
it's a weird hilarious thing. Weird, nothing else like it.
But that's what makes his film so visually compelling, because it's all in camera, a lot of it is anyway, and it's all practical. Like, you see those fireworks going off as the actors are running away, and you're like, oh my god, they're like 10 feet away. If they run slightly to the left, they're gonna get blown up for real.
And that's also why I think the CG in these movies holds up so well. I'm friendly with one of the artists who worked on the first three, and he talks a lot about how like he's like he'll do threads sometimes, breaking down shots and everything, and and I think he makes a lot of good points about it's filmed on location, and so when you add the CG element of a transformer, it just kind of it's against something that your eyes can see and light is hitting, and it feels like it's actually there, as opposed to being in a warehouse in Atlanta where Thor and Iron Man are acting against nothing, and it's like and it's just so crazy that I rewatched Transformers 1 last year when I finally sat down to watch the rest of them, because I just wasn't sure if I was going to be into them, even though I love Michael Bay. And rewatching that one, it's from 2007. That movie looks so much better than most movies we get now. It's crazy.
It really does.
It does. No, it's really fantastic how much it holds up. Again, like when the discussion of CGI and modern blockbuster filmmaking, the two that I immediately go to is Pirates of the Caribbean and Transformers. Because the CGI in those films are incredible. They're so good.
I mean, everyone always posts, about Davy Jones in the second movie, but it is like that movie's
the best creations visually. It really is.
It's like almost 20 years old, and it just looks it looks real. It's unbelievable.
It is. No, it's like, how have we regressed? The technology is supposed to go the other way. It's crazy. It really is. My only issue with the first Transformers movie, and you said something earlier, Brandon, that I wonder if we'll disagree here. I don't know. My only issue with Michael Bay movies, maybe it's the Transformers film specifically, to be fair. It might just be those movies. I do think that the editing of those films are quite bizarre at times.
It is.
Especially the first film. The editing of the first one, it baffles me every time I watch it. And I do enjoy the film still. And there are some edits where I'm like, what is the purpose of that? Like, I don't understand some of what he's doing in that film.
I completely agree with you, and that's his editing is the one thing that I can't really ever defend on any of his movies. In the example I always remember is again, Ambulance, apparently my favorite movie of all time. But the scene where Jake Gyllenhaal and Yahya Abdul-Mateen sing "Sailing."
Yes.
It's a really beautiful moment, and I feel like, and my one friend has brought this up to me, and I agree with him. He cuts it too soon. Like the final shot is of the ambulance from behind, sailing down the highway to the song, and it's like you could have just played out that song, and it would have been a really beautiful moment. But instead, you cut it too quickly, and it just like it kind of cuts the legs out from under that moment. And I agree with you. His editing
undercuts it. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, his editing is a little indefensible at times.
And it ends with Gyllenhaal going, that didn't work.
Yeah,
it's like, but it was such a good moment.
Yeah,
like,
the slap in the face.
To end that way for?
And I'm someone earlier in this show that even said I kind of like Michael Bay's editing, but it's mostly in context to him as an action filmmaker. I think where his editing is most problematic is when it's surrounding narrative as opposed to spectacle. And that's where I'll agree. And that's where I'll agree with you as well, JD, around the editing of that first Transformers, and it makes that film kind of a weird tonal experience for me. And I'm someone that didn't grow up with the Transformers franchise. I'm not nostalgic to it like you are, JD. And I do recognize that there is a tone to that world and that lore that is, meant to be kind of fun and silly and childish. That is the thing. But when you have Michael Bay basically making a self-serious Armageddon-like thriller, and then all of a sudden the Transformers start talking and peeing on John Turturro, it's like I feel like when I watch that movie, it's like I'm switching between Armageddon and Cartoon Network over and over again. And that's I think that's the Transformers movie that gives me the most whiplash out of any of them because of that reason. Even though like you look at it visually, you can't help but admire that. Okay, this represents the decline of modern Hollywood because there's at least something tangible here happening still.
Yeah. I mean, the edit that I always think about maybe most in that film, in terms of again how wonky it is. But it also just feels like Michael Bay, because there's that moment where Sam is running away from Barricade, who is the cop car. And you see Michaela coming down the street on her moped. Yeah. Okay. And so there's a shot of him running away. And the next edit isn't just him stopping her as anyone would in that moment to be like, hey, we need to just stop her on her moped. Let's get out of here. No, Ray Lewis tackles her off the moped. It's like, why? No one would do that.
Ridiculous.
It's just this weird edit to her, just a spear driving her into the ground. Like, what was the point of that?
Now I hate that edit even more because I hate the Ravens, and so.
Oh, good man.
I'm a Steelers fan, so I have to.
I'm with you. I'm a Steelers fan as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Which is interesting because I live just outside Philadelphia. When I say that, I get kind of in trouble.
Oh, well, see, it's funny. I've been getting in trouble lately because my current girlfriend is a diehard Browns fan. So, we're not. Okay. She told I feel bad about this. I told her I don't care about the Browns, and she's like, "Well, that's worse than not hating them to me." And I'm like, but you don't get it. You're not a rival for us the way the Ravens are.
Sometimes apathy is the worst thing, right?
Yeah, like I'm focused on the Ravens, and
I don't blame you. I am too.
Yeah, but that's cool though. Nice to meet a fellow Steelers fan.
Absolutely, yeah. Got to get our table towels going.
Yeah,
there you go. That's so funny. What are the chances of that?
I don't think that would happen. That's amazing. I love it.
I mean, Steelers fans are everywhere, so maybe
they are.
Well, I'm in Pittsburgh, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do love that city. My wife actually grew up from Pittsburgh, or she was born there at least. Her parents are from there. So,
cool.
It's a great city.
Yeah.
I grew up in Michigan, so I'm a Lions fan, but my mom is also a diehard Steelers fan. So we can somewhat connect all three of us there.
I feel like we're kind of similar cities too. I was really rooting for you guys last year, and that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
me too. It was crazy. Like all my friends back home still is like, you should have been here because I live in Florida now, but like they're like, you should have been here. It was the most electric the city has been in who knows how long.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It was absolutely wild.
You would have loved to see that happen. Underdogs, baby.
I know. But circling it back to the Browns, what's interesting is it does feel like the Browns and the Lions have more of a rivalry because those fan bases are very close to each other. They're right next to each other
geographically.
And they've, at least in my lifetime, they've always been bad. I know the Browns had some success in the late 80s, but since then it's, the Lions and the Browns, they're competing for which franchise is the worst.
And they both won 0-16 at one point.
There's been some heated discourse between those two fan bases.
I forget who it was, but someone I think it was our good friend Christian Eulenberg, who is also a Steelers fan. He sent me this one TikTok or something of a guy giving his top 10 least favorite NFL fan bases. and he put the Steelers on there twice.
Wow. You're right. You're right about us being everywhere, though, because like I went to visit her in New York this last week, and she took me. One of the first things not first things, but one of the things we did while we were out, because I'm thinking about moving to New York in general. And she took me to a Steelers bar there, and she's like, "This is where you'll be on Sundays, and you're not going to talk to me all Sunday."
Nice.
But we are everywhere. It is fun to like, everywhere you go, it feels like there are Steelers fans.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that and Lions fans are weirdly everywhere as well. Like there was a whole thing throughout all of last season how the Lions traveled as well as any other, if not more than any other fan base. And
That's
it's the
awesome.
same thing. Like I'm a huge hockey fan as well. If I take my son to the Florida Panthers game, because they're right down the street from us, and it's the Wings that are playing, that stadium is half Red Wings and half Panthers. Like it is crazy the amount of Wings fans in the area.
So do you I feel like he is only beloved in Pittsburgh. Do you hate Sidney Crosby as much as the rest of the country?
Well, no, actually. I love Sid. Maybe not in 2009. But
that's fair. That's fair.
Because at the time we were so close to back-to-back cups.
Yeah.
But I love Sid because there are very, very few players that play the game the way he has.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a legend. Like even now, what he's doing at 36 years old is astounding.
Yeah.
There are no 36-year-olds ever in the NHL to play at the level he is. It is mind-boggling. He is going to by himself, and I'm not being hyperbolic. Him by himself is going to drag the Penguins into the playoffs.
I know
it's unreal.
It's crazy, and I always feel bad, and I hope your listeners don't hate me for taking us down the sports path, but
we've done it many times.
Okay, good. I feel bad. I've been feeling a little bad lately because I'm like, oh man, it's so unfair that the Packers, went from Favre to Rodgers to Jordan Love. It feels like they just have but then I thought about it, and I was like, well, here in Pittsburgh, like we went from Lemieux to Crosby, so it's like generational player to
and here's the other thing, because I assume you two are not in the hockey world like I am.
Not as much, no. Yeah.
The number one draft pick coming out this year is also going to be generational type talent, and if the Penguins do miss, and for a long time this was the running joke for almost that exact same idea, was if they miss, they are of course going to win the lottery and get this Celebrini kid who will just continue that trend. Because that's how it works for the Penguins. They always win when generational talent is on the line. So if the Penguins do make it, if Sid does drag them in, that'll be the only reason they don't get that kid. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But if they do miss, it's almost virtually guaranteed that's going to happen. Because that is the Penguins. That's how that franchise works.
Yeah, there's a history there. Yeah, for sure.
At any rate. I don't
Should we
even
get back
know
to
where
Michael
we
Bay?
were before.
We
got down that road.
Well, it's interesting that you said you grew up a Transformers fan, because I didn't, and that's why I kind of stayed away from these movies. I saw the first one.
Sure. Yeah.
Hated the second one, and I know he hates that movie too because of the whole writer's strike thing.
Yeah.
So I hadn't seen the other three until last year, and I finally bought the 4K box set of all of them. And man, like everyone kept telling me, when you get to 3, your mind's going to be blown, and it was like. It's a good movie altogether, but that last hour is like, maybe in my mind, maybe the finest hour of blockbuster filmmaking ever. It's unbelievable. It's
easily the best of the 5, if you ask me, and it's actually one of his it's one of his better movies as well. Primarily because first off, it feels like an actual movie, which you certainly can't say that about Revenge of the Fallen. And given our comments about the editing of the first Transformers, there's still a sloppiness to that one as well. But Dark of the Moon has a real seamless energy to it. The setup, which is pretty clever in its own right, really does develop a sense of excitement when that title card finally pops up. It's actually a really good prologue. And even comedically, there's something about the energy of Dark of the Moon when you watch Sam go on all these interviews with his parents being dragged along too, which was very hit or miss for me in Revenge of the Fallen, when his mother eats like pop brownies or something like that. Like that's the extent of that film's humor. But weirdly, I was kind of on board with the film's quirky sense of humor in Dark of the Moon. And maybe it's just better editing. The fact that there was an actual script this time around, unlike Revenge of the Fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think romantically, I'm blanking on her name. Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, I think, is a major upgrade from Megan Fox. And I think she and Shia LaBeouf actually have really good chemistry together. So like there are little things like this that just it made it a better experience by comparison.
I agree with that, and it's frustrating. The Megan Fox thing is frustrating because I think she's a legitimately good actress, but you could tell she's miserable in those movies, and
it was bad utilization of her talent.
Yeah, in her comments after the fact or during the fact, actually, because she got fired for making the comments, like really do illuminate that, like, why she doesn't fit in that movie because she just wasn't being treated well, apparently, and But you're right. Like she's Rosie Huntington-Whiteley's a much better, just upgrade for that. And I think, Shia LaBeouf is probably at his most locked in that movie. He's able to be a little bit of the manic energy and funny, but he's also, he's a great dramatic actor. Say what you will about him, but he is a great dramatic actor. And so, I think that's,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, earlier I talked about Age of Extinction and the sense of urgency in that film, which I do think is great, but I do think it begins in Dark of the Moon. Age of Extinction, I think, takes what was established there and takes it to perhaps a new level, given how humanity has treated them in between films. But the way that begins in Dark of the Moon is really fantastic. And I agree, Shia LaBeouf is... I don't know if it's because after 2 movies, the writer's strike certainly did not help for the second one, but he in this film just decided to let everything go. I'm going all in. And when he's called to be funny, I think he lands a lot of those beats. And then there are times where he's just totally unhinged here. And it's great. Sometimes it's funny and it works for the dramatic stakes of the film when he's screaming his head off in the car when they go to Nest.
Or the awkward bathroom scene with Ken Jeong and John Malkovich. Like it's like that is something that weirdly, like that scene would not work in Revenge of the Fallen. And somehow it like I find it funny in Dark of the Moon. I think it's really just the smoothness of how it's integrated within the story, I think just works better here.
Yeah,
and
it's
Dark of the Moon too, like speaking of great performances, one that blows me away because like he's only really thought of as Spock, but Leonard Nimoy he's incredible in this movie. Like and I think it might it's not his last performance, but because he's in Into Darkness, right?
He has a brief moment in that movie.
So this wasn't
Into Darkness was 1 year after this, was it? Or something like that.
I think so, I can't remember exactly when he passed, but this is his I think this is one of his best performances outside of Spock. Like he's and it's just a vocal performance, but he's giving that role a lot of depth and it's really terrific.
I agree. No, he's fantastic as Sentinel. Really brings that leadership quality to the character and why they would immediately submit to him. And then he becomes a wonderful antagonist as the film goes. And you're right about that last hour or so. And I want to speak to this. I jokingly tried to offer up this story to these guys beforehand, and Brendan told me to tell it.
You texted me this. It's like, this is adorable. This should be for all of our listeners to hear.
So I was putting my son to bed, and I started watching this movie in preparation for this conversation. And longtime listeners of the show will know I have always loved this movie. Absolutely adore it.
Yeah.
And it gets to the moment where I don't know what it is about Michael Bay and highway speed chases, but they work for me.
Oh man,
and this moment here. It is so good. Steve Jablonsky deserves a goddamn medal for his work here. But it gets to that moment, and it's the Michael Bay of it all. It's Shia LaBeouf working on all cylinders, and there's of course the Transformers of it as well. And as I noted earlier, I'm very much a nerd when it comes to Transformers. So all of that coalesce into this moment where, and it's somewhat like I mentioned with Bad Boys 2, which I had watched earlier in the week and completely geeked out over that film. Like was watching it for the first time. I had the same experience. I'm watching this highway chase, about halfway through this film, and I geeked out so hard that my son sat up. He's supposed to be going to bed. He sits up, very interested in what I'm watching. So I turn the movie to him as well, and we start watching it together, to the point where, because of how everything unfolds in that last hour or so, he basically stayed up and watched the whole rest of the movie for me. And this is a movie that's 2.5 hours long. It is not short by any means. So it is, by the time the movie ends, it is at least an hour and a half past his bedtime, and he is still up. Needless to say, we both got in trouble.
That was when you sent me that portion of the text. I was like, okay, that's cute. That's cute.
Yeah. Look, was it worth it? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, you did get into a little bit of trouble.
That's really kind of that's a lovely experience to have, though, too. You know, like just to be locked in with your son like that. That's really cool. Yeah,
it was awesome.
In that scene, I think that has the best moment of like transformation ever too. The way Bumblebee, flips out of the car to catch it. It's unbelievable. It looks great. Yeah.
It does. Yeah. It does. Well, first off, JD, Sam has seen this movie before. That wasn't his first time, was it?
It was not his first time. He hadn't seen it in quite a while. And also, he's 8 now. The first time he watched this, he was much younger, maybe 4.
He probably wouldn't have remembered it then.
And I don't think he recalled the kind of details he can now, for sure.
Yeah.
Because when he started watching it and he's very engaged with it, it did seem as if it was a first time watch for him. Yeah. I think there are some elements of it that he remembered for sure, but he was equally asking questions. He wanted to know what was going on.
So he was very engaged. He was really enjoying it. That's awesome.
Wholly with it, as I was as well. And of course, I wanted to show him that whole highway chase. So once he started watching, I had to backtrack a little bit. I was like, you have to watch this whole thing. It is so good. And it's the way they transform. And there's at times like where they're half transformed, kind of flipping over, because there's a whole bunch of cars like actually traveling on the road. And so you see them like half transformed, like flipping over civilian cars that are driving down. They're of course shooting rockets and guns, and the track battle, which is the name of the track by Jablonski, there is an all-timer for me. I love it. I absolutely adore it. I've talked a lot on the show how I play beer league hockey. That is a track that I will listen to in the locker room before games. Like, it will hype you up.
Will that also be your introductory track? So if your name is ever announced for a very important game, that's the track that'll play in the background.
yeah, that's my walk-up song. It's so good.
And I don't think anyone, even though you guys got in trouble, I don't think anyone can blame you or your son, because once you get to that last hour, and once you get to that last hour, it's like, well, you can't stop now. It's like,
exactly.
The interesting thing about that last hour, and I can't take credit for this comparison. I forget which critic made this comparison, but Dark of the Moon came out in 2011, and just 1 year later, The Avengers came out. And I think there's something weirdly similar about the final hour here and the final climactic battle in New York City in The Avengers. It's like just the alien choreography, the physique of it all, the light in the sky aspect of it all. And at that time,
I never thought about that before.
Yeah, again, I can't take credit for that. That's an observation that someone else said that I thought was actually pretty interesting. But, this was at a time before Marvel Studios was bought out by Disney. So these movies were still being distributed by Paramount. And maybe it makes sense that they had similar budgetary pockets set aside for a lot of these movies, and maybe similar sets and similar teams already put in place. So they're maybe kind of made almost simultaneously. But it's interesting that for how much we praise Joss Whedon's The Avengers for being ahead of the curve, maybe there are some things visually he was taking from Michael Bay that happened a year beforehand.
You're not alone in thinking that, because I'm going to peel back the curtain here a little bit for something I worked on recently. So for the for Vulture, I do this thing for like we do stunt awards every year and award like the best in stunts. And this year we did like a companion piece of like the 100 fights that influenced or that shaped cinema. That was the name of the article. And a bunch of writers got together. We would have Zoom meetings every week to try to pare it down to 100 fights.
Okay.
And I kept making the case. I was like, we have to include Dark of the Moon on here because it influenced like the next 10, 15 years of action. But it ended up not being included because we couldn't pin down one fight where that made sense, because it really is just that last hour. And you're right. You're right. Like, there is a direct, I mean, I'm sure Avengers was being worked on right around the same time. So, but still, there is that battle. The Battle of New York feels exactly like the Battle of Chicago. And you're right. No, it isn't talked about enough because
I agree. And I don't know if it's because Transformers as a franchise doesn't have the same cultural pull in the zeitgeist as Marvel does. I don't know, but. Well, or maybe it's the whole Michael Bay of it all, because he's a polarizing filmmaker. But I do agree
crazy.
that.
Yeah, well, just which is crazy because like it's so funny that Whedon is the one that's seen as the influence, and he is as great of a writer as he can be. He's not half the filmmaker.
I agree. Totally agree. Absolutely.
I mean, I'm actually someone, as much as I love the Avengers, I think as an action film, Joss Whedon, the director, shows up to play more in something like Age of Ultron.
Yeah, that's a much better directed movie. Yeah.
And in terms of, I guess, great moments, whether it be fan moments or action moments, I think of the scene when they're first trying to get into Chicago and they get attacked, and the Autobots show up, and Prime, again, there with the gun, and has his Optimus Prime speech, which you can't help but love as a fan. And again, Steve Jablonsky, just goddamn genius, because he comes in with that original theme there as well. And so it just becomes this great moment that leads into the actual battle itself. But I think of Prime going, "I'm coming after you," when he has the jetpack on. There's, of course, when he goes after Shockwave there near the end. And there's that, again, the camera sliding with him as he goes, and he's just tearing shit up. Awesome. Like, it's just, it's really great.
And you talk about trying to get into the city. I love when the military flies in with their wingsuits.
All that stuff.
And that's such that moment, like, kind of, you catch your breath watching that. And then I thought about it on this most recent rewatch, where I was like, man, you see that again. I mean, I know it's not the first time that's ever happened, but like, you keep seeing it in movies later. Like, I think it happens in 2014's Godzilla. There's a scene with that.
Where they're dropping down.
And it's either, I always get the names mixed up, even though I love this franchise, but it's either Rogue Nation or Fallout, where Tom Cruise does it, flying into the city like that.
Where they
the Halo jump in Fallout.
Jump.
The one that they did with Henry Cavill.
For whatever reason, Rogue Nation is my favorite, but for whatever reason, I kind of blend those two together. Those two feel most of a piece to me out of all the
there is like a unification between them.
There is. I agree.
But you see a lot of that wingsuit stuff like in other movies since. And again, I don't think anyone's ripping Bay off, because he wasn't even the first to do that. But that moment in the larger battle just really took my breath away the first time I saw it.
It's really exciting. And again, like a filmmaker is good when it comes to action when you watch it and you think to yourself, how did they actually pull that off? Like what is this a combination of? Is this actually really happening? Is this like
I do
real
know some of it was practical. I do know,
which is pretty amazing that he was able to capture it in that way.
The wingsuits, I don't know fully, but I do know because he does it twice. There's the wingsuits, and then there's the moment later on in the battle when a bunch of them just parachute from the top of Sears Tower, or one of them. That I do know was real. I remember a lot of the footage, the behind the scenes footage from when the film came out, or even when they were making the film, it was big news, where you see these guys parachuting in Chicago, and you had a bunch of fans there watching it unfold in real time and posting it on Twitter. So I that part I do know is practical. The wingsuits might be a combination. I would imagine as a combination. But yeah, I mean, again, that's part of, to your point, Brandon, why it's so breathtaking, because he's doing this very practically and throwing in a bunch of CGI that, again, still holds up pretty well comparatively to
one of my favorite things recently is when I was going through these movies last year, going through 3 through 5 and rewatching them. My friend Monique lives in Las Vegas, and she was like, "You'll love this," and she like sent me a video that she recorded from her phone, like where she was. They're filming in Vegas, and you can just see the explosions happening, like, and she's filming from her phone from a window, and it's like that's so crazy. They're just blowing up Las Vegas, right? He's really kind of the last to do that, because as much as I love Cameron, I think Cameron's an incredible filmmaker, and I do think there's a lot of great stunt work in the Avatar movies. It's still, and those movies look unbelievable, but they're still like in a confined space and everything. But Bay is really one of the last to go out there and just blow shit up.
Didn't he say that about himself once for some like car commercial that he actually like was featured, and he's like, I'm Michael Bay, I like to blow shit up?
I think you're right, because that's right, there's I think I just unconsciously quoted that, because you're right, he's in front of something and there's a big explosion behind him.
I forget what that was an ad for. It may have been a car commercial, it may have been something else, but it was very self-referential in a way that I just couldn't help but admire.
He's delightful. This is another funny thing about him that like I feel like speaks so much to his brand, is like the last 2 years he's my dream interview, and I keep making the joke that once it happens I'm just going to retire, but the last 2 years I keep getting close, and first it was through Universal, this last year was through his agent, and his agent referred to him in the email as Bay in all caps. He's like, I'll send this request on to Bay. And I'm just like, I hope like Michael Bay makes the people close to him call him that. Like, and if it's in all caps, you have to yell it.
Scream it like there's an explosion behind you.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Do we know if he's working on anything now since Ambulance?
There's something called, I want to say it's called Black 6. There's really nothing known about it from what I can tell. It's frustrating because he made that deal with Netflix to do 6 Underground, and that did Black 5. It's nothing's known about it. He's directing it, and Aaron Kruger, who wrote on some of the Transformer movies, is writing it. But
okay,
I don't know when that's going to happen, because like Ambulance was a pretty big bomb, and 6 Underground was straight to Netflix. So it seems he's in a very weird point in his career, and it just kind of breaks my heart that like Michael Bay, people aren't rushing out to see his movies. But I mean, I think for better or worse, the Transformers movies kind of put a little bit of a cloud over his name for people, because I think those movies have such a bad reputation, but as we've been talking about, they really don't deserve it. What
I secretly hope happens is, so we have Bad Boys for Life came out a few years ago, and that sort of reinvigorated that franchise. We have Ride or Die coming out this year, I think, and looks like it's gonna be a lot of fun. If that ends up being a big hit, I want to see Bay come back for a Bad Boys 5.
I would love that, because I think the two directors who are doing these latest two, I think they did a really great job on 3, but I would like to see him, back doing something like that. For sure.
Well, and the irony, of course, you watch the trailer for this new one that's coming out, and they're clearly showing a ton of reverence to Michael Bay. Like there's a ton of Michael Bay shots everywhere.
It's certainly more Bad Boys 2 by comparison to
definitely.
It definitely seems like it's moving in that energetic direction.
And so there's got like, if that film does well, and hopefully it does, I'm really looking forward to Ride or Die. But if that film does well, and it's at its core this reverence to Michael Bay, doesn't that mean that audiences still want him to some degree?
Exactly,
Imagine if that's like the pitch, where it's all building up to the return of Michael Bay, and he's basically told, make this movie Bad Boys 5 as if it's the last movie you're ever going to make. I would be first in line for that.
It's so funny you say that, because the joke I made after I saw Dark of the Moon, I think I might have said it on Twitter, I can't remember, but I said somewhere that last hour of Dark of the Moon feels like somebody told Michael Bay that he was going to be executed as soon as he called cut, like on the final frame, like
oh, it's amazing. But you can kind of sense, we keep talking about how great that final act in Dark of the Moon is, but there is real conviction and passion for how well that movie is staged. It really is effective.
Might explain why it's 2.5 hours too. I got to prolong this.
He does have issues with pacing here and there, but that's the one that's most like Cameron to me, because I think Cameron is maybe the best at pacing his films to, like you brought up Titanic, and then like I think the Avatar movies, both of them do it really well, where each hour is almost its own movie in and of itself, but they all connect to something.
They all feel like mini trilogies in a single contained experience.
And
yeah, like like Dark of the Moon isn't a perfect movie from a pacing standpoint. If anything, it's perhaps maybe the John Turturro, Alan Tudyk stuff that I don't love. I think that's perhaps the biggest misstep. But a lot of what else works around it, I think, is very effective. It's certainly the smoothest and most efficiently told Transformers film in the Bay catalog.
Well, and we brought up Turturro a few times, and watching this movie, I always wonder, is he like secretly a huge Coen Brothers fan? Because Francis McDormand's in this,
That's a good point.
Malkovich, Turturro, like it's just funny. It's like a Coen's all-star cast in this.
It is. Yeah, Francis McDormand having a ton of fun. And
it's so bizarre that she's in this movie. She's really great in it, but it's bizarre because she never does stuff like this. So I don't know. It's really cool to see her in it.
Yeah, I agree.
No, I know. Just having a blast. It's really great. And the other thing I love about Dark of the Moon is how they recontextualize the whole space race. I think is a lot of fun. Like it's so, again, to be fair to Michael Bay, because I did go after him pretty hard as far as the editing goes. But I think the editing, especially in that opening sequence, again, Jablonski comes to play immediately, comes out of the gate. But the editing of real archival footage with the recreations.
With Nixon and Kennedy.
Sequence is great. It's so good.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Forrest Gump a little bit, but it's you could definitely see where he's maybe like pulling some similar inspiration to how visual effects handled it in the past. But it does mostly work, and I was surprised by that too. That there is a smoothness there for sure.
Yeah, I love that about this movie for sure.
Yeah, establishes Prime, because like early on he's still pretty upset, and even though I had never really thought about it in these terms, but throughout this conversation we've talked about how Bay does have this cynical backbone that doesn't get talked about as much. That is very much at play here, given the how quickly Earth turns on the Autobots, given how this plays out. And it's interesting to see how, and not that the film is making any sort of commentary, but I think Bay uses that dramatically very well to give not just these human characters, but especially Optimus and Sentinel, give those characters really something to play off of that I think is fantastic. I think that's why Optimus Prime is has not just his convictions, but I don't know, there's something about that here with Prime that feels palpable to me. And what makes his heroism in the last act, I think, fit just how bombastic the film is.
We often use the word pathos, perhaps more than we should on this show, JD, but I do think there is perhaps an earned pathos in Dark of the Moon that some of these other films just don't have. And while the film still has a lot of that trademark cynicism that we tend to associate Michael Bay with, Dark of the Moon is also the one that seems to be the most I don't know what the word is, maybe self-referential or at least respecting in history in a way. And I think of it in the recontextualization of the moon landing, which could be a very cynical thing to do, but you could tell that he still has a reverence for history there. I mean, it's even to the point that the real Buzz Aldrin shows up to play Buzz Aldrin in this movie. And that's not something you can get away with for something that is meant to take history and completely reformat it into something else. But it still seems to have a bit of respect for the actual history that did happen. And that's a hard thing to find a middle ground in. And I think he does a pretty good job there.
It's true, and I think he kind of, I unabashedly love The Last Night, but he does kind of just pole vault over that line of respectability with, it is funny that he does have a running thread of how much he loves history for sure within these movies, because The Last Night has the whole thing that the Transformers were there for the Underground Railroad and they were doing that. But I do love that about this, that there's a good balance of feeling we're not, like you said, we're not recontextualizing anything and kind of making light of it, where it's a good balance for sure.
It is, I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, and earlier we talked about Pearl Harbor and how not great of a movie it is, but I don't think Bay's coming at that with anything but reverence and honor for those guys, for sure. Right. Or on a much less somber note, something like The Rock and Alcatraz and the history, the mythos around that whole thing as well comes through in that film. So Yeah, I mean, it's very prevalent in his movies. There's no doubt about
I
it.
just have to ask because I just said I unabashedly love it. Do you where are you guys on The Last Night? Because it's a bizarre movie.
That's my least favorite Michael Bay film.
I totally get it. I totally get it. I don't think it works at all, but I love the galaxy brain of all of it. It's
okay.
It probably is bad, but it's eminently watchable for me.
Yeah, I like at this point again, as I noted earlier, it's 6 Underground for me is my least favorite, but a rewatch could change that. So I do like The Last Night more than that, but maybe not by too much. But it's like for me, it does feel as if Bay has checked out at that point. He did not want to continue doing these, but given the success, because Age of Extinction was like $1 billion hit. Right. And I don't know if anyone expected that.
No.
Yeah.
So of course he comes back. I don't think he really wanted to. And so, and it was clear they had no idea what they wanted to do for a story.
He does feel invigorated. He does feel invigorated in Age of Extinction, where I agree with you. You don't feel it as much. Last Night's not cohesive at all. Like I don't think a single thing of that movie makes any sense. And you know, again, we were just talking way earlier about how script isn't the most important thing, especially with his movies. But even from like a one scene to the next standpoint, like geographically, it's like, what the hell is going on? And like, and I feel like too, we talked a lot about the tangibility of his movies. That final act in that movie, I think it's bizarre and fun, but it's so weightless that you're almost like, you know, it feels like he's kind of gone a little bit.
I agree. Like I love Age of Extinction up until where the film shifts to China. I think that's where it really fizzles out for me. But I do think much of what leads up to it is really quite great. And I think maybe part of why there's still conviction there for Bay is because he doesn't really consider 2 to be part of any of this. And so this is his official trilogy. And then by the time he gets to the 5th one, he's like, I'm done here, guys. I don't really, and it really comes through not just in terms of how the story isn't there, but if you look at it from just a Transformers nerd perspective, he does a lot of things in that film that like fans, I think, would really be repulsed by.
I know. And I know Age of Extinction has been getting kind of reevaluated as perhaps the second best Transformers movie in the Bay universe specifically. And I did go back to revisit it to see, okay, am I missing something in this one? Because I used to really hate this movie. And it is better. I do think it is better than its reputation deserves. I don't think it all the way gets there for the reasons that you're talking about there, JD. When it gets to China, it certainly spins its wheels a lot. And we talked about the Romeo and Juliet loss thing and everything there. Really, the biggest problem with that movie is just there's a better condensed version of that movie that I think actually makes it a really good experience. But there's a conviction and a tangibility to that one that kind of matches Dark of the Moon. That makes it maybe on equal playing fields aesthetically speaking.
Especially with the Transformers characters themselves, like Pissed Off Prime and Age of Extinction, I just love. Especially because it's so contradictory to the ethos of that character in terms of like historical lore.
And like, Lockdown is actually a pretty effective villain as well.
Lockdown is awesome.
Like Age of Extinction
Lockdown is ridiculous.
I love
so
it.
Good.
But Age of Extinction kind of reminds me of like, let's say this is a weird comparison, but you look at the recent Planet of the Apes trilogy, the rebooted trilogy, when the apes were really the main characters and not the humans. Age of Extinction is where it's, okay, the Transformers are actually the main characters this time around. And when you put it through that light, I find the movie even more interesting because like they're the ones that actually carry most of that weight where it's needed.
And Lockdown is like the flip side of what I was talking about earlier, is like assimilating into another culture, and he's working against his own interests basically to hunt down, you know, his own people essentially for a world that hates him. He's a fascinating villain for sure.
Sure.
And I mean, he looks cool as hell.
He does. He looks cool. I think he's more intimidating than Megatron. Certainly more successful than anything we saw with Megatron in any of these movies. You know, and I just, again, I think what Jablonski brings to him really does enhance that visceral quality in the character. So like, there's still a lot about that film where it does seem as if everyone cares. Last Night is where I am a little at a distance with the film in that regard. But there are still Transformers elements that I do appreciate. Jablonski still comes to play, so I can't, dislike the score at all. And similar to Francis McDormand, I think Anthony Hopkins is just having the time of his life. He's having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I can't help but love that.
Hearing him say the word "dude" was always funny to me.
and it's so funny. I think this is just a joke between my friends and I, but we're half convinced that he has like the robot butler and everything, and in Zack Snyder's new Rebel Moon movies, there's a robot character that looks exactly like that butler played by Anthony Hopkins. So he has to be a fan of these movies.
That's funny. Yeah, that's really funny.
I didn't even put that together till now. That's a
wow. The plot thickens.
Speaking of, Michael Bay influences all, but
he does.
Exactly.
He's everywhere. Can't escape him.
But speaking of great deaths, Hopkins has a tremendous death.
Yes, he does.
He
kind of does.
That movie.
Yeah, he kind of does.
Really blowing hell.
And I love, again, this movie making no sense whatsoever. I almost said Stanley Kubrick. Jesus. What is
Very
his name?
different world.
Why am I blanking on his name?
Stanley
Tucci?
Yeah, wow, thank you.
You're welcome. The other Stanley.
Just bizarre him coming back to be in The Last Night in a completely unrelated role.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the beginning.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, very strange.
Such a bizarre movie. I like I said, I unabashedly love it, but like I can't in good conscience ever recommend it to anyone.
No. Cannot.
I wish more movies like that would exist. We need more dividers in that way. That really compel that kind of interesting conversation.
Yeah, because it's fundamentally not a good movie, but it's also like maybe the best movie.
I mean, given the landscape of Hollywood, we talked about how Michael Bay has certainly found more of a place of respectability given the landscape of Hollywood. But I'm at a point now where it's more interesting to see like really fascinating bad failures than just safe mediocrity. And I think in a weird way, as much as I don't like The Last Night, it fits a little bit more into that spectrum at times. So like, even though I don't really care for the movie at all, it's certainly more interesting to talk about than, let's say, something like, I don't know, Black Adam, for instance, which I forgot about 5 minutes after it ended.
Exactly.
And I at least appreciate that.
And what's frustrating, not to go on a tangent about that, what's frustrating is like Bay is a guy who can jump into, IP and franchise stuff and still make it feel like that this is a Michael Bay movie. I love I think it's pronounced Jamais Sarah. I love most of his work, pre getting tied up with The Rock, but I mean Black Adam that could have been made by anybody. And it really
could have.
Yeah. Exactly. Which, begs the question, because if there isn't much on the table for Michael Bay, would he jump either back into Transformers, because the last two films have not done very well either, or another IP? Do we think that's possible?
I don't know. Like I'm so sick of like superhero movies, but at the same time, I'm like, he could be the one that makes one that's like feels singular, but I just don't know. Like I know for a few years there, Spielberg was talking about how he wanted to do the Blackhawks movie for DC, and I'm like, and I feel like Bay already kind of covered that ground, but I feel like he would be a much better fit for that. Sure. I don't know. Sure. I don't know where he kind of goes from here. It's weird. It's like, he's in such a weird point in his career.
And this is a limbo period for sure. And to, I guess, answer your question, JD, if we'd like to see him come back to some type of franchise, I'll simply go back to the Bad Boys 5 conversation we were having. That would be my preference if he were to ever return to anything. But
agreed.
If it were to be Transformers, I think a lot of it has to do with this. There's an upcoming animated movie coming out later this year, right? Transformers 1, I think it's called. And if maybe there's success with that one, I mean, if there's success with that one, it might mean less Michael Bay coming back. So I don't know, but
and I think with the Transformers live action movies post him, I'm not a Transformer. I didn't grow up with it. I don't really know a lot, but it's funny to me. Like I saw both Bumblebee and whatever the newest one was called,
Rise of the Beasts.
Yeah. And I think Bumblebee as a movie is like very fun, but it's so funny to me that for years and years people were like Bay is ruining the Transformers, this and that and everything. But when you watch these two newest movies, there's not a single image I can remember from either of these movies even if Bumblebee is like a very fun, kid-friendly movie,
Mhm.
whereas Michael Bay, I can remember so many images from these movies, and it's like,
Yeah, that's fair.
it's like, yeah, like Rise of the Beast especially. I just thought that was a very ugly looking movie, and it just
Yeah. The
Yeah.
one thing I really do like Bumblebee, and this I guess speaks to what I said earlier in terms of how how I look at a film visually, but I also look at films emotionally in this huge way. I do think that the emotion of Bumblebee is sincere and really great.
Yes.
I do love that about that
Yeah,
film.
that
It
saves it.
certainly lacks the visual flair that comes with Michael Bay. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So
Yeah.
where it loses the Bayhem of it all, I think it makes up for in character and emotion. Rise of the
Absolutely.
Beast, though, lacks both.
Yeah.
It's very dull and bland. That to me was disappointing because, again, circling it back to my history with Transformers, like the Beast Wars stuff, I thought was really great as a kid too. Like I loved all of that stuff, and that was wasted potential in this new film. They didn't really delve into it in any significant way. So, and it does. And given that ending, it's very clear that this is nothing more than a jumping point off into something larger that they want to get into.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That saddens me a bit because I was really pulling for a director like Stephen Caple Jr. with regard to Rise of the Beast. I think Creed 2, which he directed before that, is a very underrated movie. I think that's one of the best movies in that overarching franchise. And I think it's a well-directed movie. It's a well-paced movie, and there is a visual flair to it that feels like it at least came from the mind of an artist.
I totally agree. Yeah.
And I was really hoping to see that again.
I love Creed 2. I think, there's that movie had a lot of like problems behind the scenes because Stallone wanted more control, and you can tell because it really Dolph Lundgren's one of my favorite actors. Like I just love, and I think
he's so good in that movie.
He's so good. Yeah, like I think late period Lundgren has been really interesting, and he's really great in that movie. But at the same time, all of the Drago stuff feels very much like Stallone wanting to be like, I want to connect this to my stuff, but just but
like
I do
he was
love
ghost
it.
directing the movie a little bit in some ways.
And I heard from some people that was kind of what happened, and that's why he got kicked off of the third, that they
interesting.
split.
All right.
But still, Stephen Caple Jr. though, like I don't think he gets enough credit though, because I do think I think it was him. I don't think I should rephrase that. I don't think Stallone was good. I think he might have had more input on I want more of my ideas in here, but I think
more of a narrative thing, I think he was or at least the sole screenwriter, or one of
he's
co-written
on the screenplay, I think.
He is.
The funniest scene to me is apparently he wanted to have he really fought hard, and thank God was denied. He wanted to have a fist fight with Drago in the hospital, and it's like, thank God that didn't happen.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think Creed 2 is very underrated, and so I've been kind of pulling for him too, because I think some of these guys just get lost in the franchise stuff, and there's like
especially too early when they don't know how to play the game just yet.
Yeah, and it's very clear that studios simply want directors for hire. They're not trying to do anything interesting.
Yeah, they're trying to fill a seat.
Which is why the Michael Bay Transformers films, or any of his films, they just feel more
still Michael Bay
films
films.
coming out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, like we've had this entire conversation about Michael Bay, and we haven't even mentioned like Armageddon. We've barely mentioned The Rock, like these two, great films,
really good movies.
Really
they're among his best.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, like I'm trying to look at my ranking of Michael Bay right now, and it tends to fluctuate every now and then. But I mean, right now, Bad Boys 2 is my favorite.
Yeah,
it's because it's his most Michael Bay movie, like we already talked about. But numbers 2, 3, and 4 tend to stagger between The Rock, Pain and Gain, and Armageddon. With Dark of the Moon maybe rising that number 5 spot for me, but that's my current top 5. But that could really change depending on what I just feel like I want to gravitate towards. If I rewatch Pain and Gain and feel like I want to like really hone in on the satire of that one and what that film is going for and its deconstructionist ideas, I might be like, actually, this might be his best movie. I'm putting this at number 1 now. But these are all very interesting movies, and I think they're all really they low key slap. They really do slap.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because a lot of people will put The Rock up there as one of his best, and I do agree with that. But I do feel like I have my 4 of like the ones that kind of rotate for me, and it's Dark of the Moon, Ambulance, Pain and Gain, and what was the other one? Bad Boys 2. Yeah. Those are like the 4 that kind of just feel like my favorites at any given moment. But,
that's fair.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I just revisited Ambulance this week and liked it much more this time around. So I do feel like I might need to wrestle with this a little bit more because right now it's Bad Boys 2 and Pain and Gain, as I mentioned. Those 1A and 1B for me.
Yeah.
Number 3 is probably The Rock. I love that. I know we haven't talked about that too much in this conversation, but I adore that. Yeah. Maybe for similar reasons as I like the Bad Boys films, because I do like the thrill of that film. I love the urgency of it.
Camaraderie.
The camaraderie, exactly. Yeah. It's the chemistry of Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. And I think that film does a similar thing to Bad Boys in the sense that it rides that line very well of dramatic urgency and humor. Like Nick Cage in that film is hilarious to me. I absolutely adore him.
And we talked a bit about how, he kind of made John Krasinski an action star. That's the movie that made Nicolas Cage an action star. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair point. Fair point.
Absolutely. No. And, and Ed Harris is also very good in the film. So like a great cast. So like I that's probably number 3 at this point. Dark of the Moon 4. And then from there, like maybe Armageddon at 5 or the first Bad Boys, maybe. I don't know. And then I'm really coming around on Age of Extinction though. At least up until they go to China, I think it's some of Bay's best work.
What are your all's thoughts on The Island?
I've only seen it once, and it was in theaters, and I don't remember it much.
Yeah, because I'm in the same boat. I was curious what you guys thought of that one, but I remember being kind of intrigued by the premise, but finding it ultimately weirdly confusing. And I have to go back and revisit that one. I haven't really heard people talk about that one all that much.
That is talking about the least. Yeah, every once in a while, you get like a Bay head on Twitter who would be like, "Actually, guys, The Island's one of his best," and it always makes me. Should I rewatch that? So I think I should get to it.
I might have to do that too.
I haven't seen it since it first came out. 2005. So
yeah.
But you know what? Like I might after The Rock. That 4 and 5 spot, as I noted, is kind of up in the air. I might throw Ambulance in there at number 4 too. Like I think I'm coming around on Ambulance, at least as like a Michael Bay movie that's. Again, it's not Transformers. It feels like a movie that came out 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And we just don't see anymore.
Yeah.
I just really admire that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Same here.
And I do think 13 Hours is up there too. As one of his best.
Yeah. That's
really
up there
like
for
that
me.
film a lot too.
Yeah.
So. Certainly a lot more here to appreciate than not, I would argue.
Yeah.
Well, 10 years from now, best director goes to Michael Bay.
I can't wait.
I know. I'm definitely going to be there. Well, and it's speaking about his Limbo we mentioned earlier, it does feel ironic, sadly, because the only one that might take him right now is a streamer, a Netflix, if you will.
Yeah.
But his movies are not made to be seen on the small screen.
Really not.
No,
not at all.
No, not at all.
That's like what I don't like. It's like, what do you do with him now? Like, it's okay, you could watch his movie on Netflix, but there's something disappointing about. Maybe that's why I didn't respond to 6 Underground as much. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just the circumstances of it.
Yeah. At any rate, we've talked a lot about Michael Bay. Do you guys have any final thoughts before we wind down here?
Oh, this was a great conversation. We went for almost 2 hours on him.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this. I really appreciate getting the chance to do it.
Yeah, of course. We loved having you here.
This was a ton of fun. Yeah, we would love to have you back anytime.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially when the next Michael Bay movie comes out. But
Yeah.
before then,
you're already locked in for that guest spot.
Oh, well, thank you. I can't wait.
Yeah, but anytime we would love to have you back. This was a ton of fun. Brandon, tell everyone where we can find your work. Where can we find you on social media?
So I'm on Twitter under my name, Brandon Streussnig, and I'm sure it'll be listed on, in the information because my name's a weird one. So I'm on Twitter there, and my work is all over the place in Vulture, Polygon, Inverse. I think fairly soon I should have an interview coming out with Zack Snyder. That a very brief one, but very cool to talk to him. So yeah, that'll be the next thing I have. But kind of taking it a little easy right now because the stunt awards I do for Vulture take a lot out of me. So I kind of just do a little less for a while. But yeah, just mostly on Twitter talking about Michael Bay.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah,
love it.
Which is hilarious because I had noted that I had seen Bad Boys 2 earlier, and one of the connections I made is something that you tweeted about that I did not realize until it came across my timeline, because it was like last year, I think. I don't know. Sometime recently, I caught up with Police Story, and I made the connection of that to Bad Boys 2. It's like, oh my God, that's the same shot.
It is.
The same thing. And I saw your tweet about that. I was like, I'm not the only one
amazing.
to catch that. That was hilarious.
It's, we were joking that it all goes through Michael Bay, but it is Jackie Chan. I mean, it's his birthday today. It's happy. I don't know when this will be airing, but or dropping or whatever. But but happy birthday, Jackie Chan. But I think it all comes back to him in a lot of ways, because it is funny when you watch Police Story, because I saw it after Bad Boys 2 as well, and I was just like, oh my God, like it's
crazy. Recognize it immediately. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, really do appreciate you being here. Obviously, go check out Brandon's work. It is absolutely terrific. Be sure to follow him on Twitter as well, on social media. Really do appreciate you being here, Brandon. This was a ton of fun. Really enjoyed this a lot.
Thank you so much, guys. It was my pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Really do appreciate you being here. Be sure to be on the lookout for our reviews this week. We will have a conversation on Monkey Man and the horror film The First Omen, which was not on my radar at all until everyone started talking about how great it was. So we're going to prioritize that now. So you can be on the lookout for that. There is, of course, a new Women in Session episode coming out. I am going to edit that as soon as we're done here. So be sure to go and check that out. And I believe that is it. Of course, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. Be sure to just search InSession Film. You'll find us on those platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube, please leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that fun stuff.
Yep.
You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can find us at Patreon, patreon.com/InSessionFilm. That's a great way to support the show. Okay, I'm out of breath. So as we wind down
a lot of
here,
plugs. You're good at it, man. I should start taking over some of those. Maybe we should tag team those.
we definitely can. We'll talk about that for.
We'll re-script this show. Yeah. Gotta love how in the middle of an actual live segment, you're gonna change things a little bit.
Yeah, we'll change it. There's a lot to get through there.
Yeah.
At any rate, as we wind down here, do you guys have any final thoughts on anything before we get out of here?
No, Bayfest. No? That was a good Bayfest.
Yeah, we're. I guess I will steal Brandon's thing. I think we are all three of us are proud Baytriots.
Yeah,
you really should trademark that.
Just start wearing a T-shirt that says "Baytriots are in control."
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
If you get that made, let me know. I'll be the first to buy.
I love it.
Yeah. At any rate, really do appreciate you being here, Brandon. This was great.
Thank you guys.
All enjoyed it as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast.